Surely a king would know his best should he warn, clothed that his people might receive him well. Yet though wrapped in suffering is this one adorned as the hero of Israel. Surely a king in lavish grandeur live, placed on a high and awesome throne to dwell, but here not a place.
Good evening. Thanks for tuning in. I'm here with Curtis Pittman and Nick Westberg. I'm Cliff Sabro, and we're continuing our study of the book of Matthew. We're coming to the end of this magnificent gospel, and I hope you enjoyed this study. I know I have. I've grown a lot in understanding that Jesus is the promised Messiah. We've talked about why people rejected him, and now we just finished up a section about his crucifixion. So open up your Bibles, Matthew chapter 27. We'll pick up in verse 55 in a moment. But Nick and Curtis, anything we want to bring up to our audience to remind them or to just bring to mind the context of the section before we get into the text tonight?
Well, we're just finishing up. Jesus has been crucified, and we see this interaction between not only the Roman soldiers, but also the Jewish scribes, Pharisees, and the elders of the people. And then we left with this realization, or this confession of the Centurion in verse 54, that truly this was the Son of God. And so it's interesting that...
And that seems to be a peak in this book, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
And that's what we saw throughout chapter 27, that title, Son of God, just started popping up a lot, or something we hadn't seen previously, culminating in this Centurion's confession.
Right. And it means something different to the Jews than it does to, we look at that, we go, okay, well, what does that mean? If you're haven't dug in it, you may think, well, it means deity, but really it was a title for kings. And I think we talked about that last week, about how David was called the Son of God. And to the Jews, that's what they were looking for, was the one who was called Son of God. Or the one who displayed the characteristics of a son of God, a king, a ruler of a kingdom. Now, here Jesus is talking about his kingdom and the kingdom that is to come and the kingdom that is that he is going to establish himself. And that's a key word throughout the book too. It's all over the place in the book of Matthew. And it's important, again, to a Jewish mind because they would look at that much differently than, say, we would.
Yeah. Yeah, we lose the meaning of the significance of that
right,
term.
Yeah. I mean, just because we have different terminology, we have different lingo, and so.
Well, this section then ends, as Curtis mentioned, with the centurion confessing, verse 54, truly this was the Son of God. And that's right after the tombs were opened and the veil was torn in two and the sky went dark and all that kind of stuff. He goes, this was the Son of God. Now, verse 55 picks up. It says, now many women were there looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. Now, we're going to come back to these women in a moment here as we go on to the text, but I find it interesting that Matthew mentions that these people were also there. Do you see any significance in that, or anything stands out to you?
I mean, going back to what we see in Matthew chapter 1 with the genealogy of Jesus, right? There is significance placed on women. Mm-hmm. And so here, right after Jesus' death, we see the first person to make the confession is a Gentile. And then the next characters, like Nick has been pointing out for the last few weeks, to come in are a bunch of women. We don't see the Jewish men here. Yeah. They have all dispersed, right? But the ones that stayed close to Jesus were these women that were there, had followed him for a while and were ministering to him.
And now, we've talked about, these are witnesses. These are witnesses, people who've been there all the way through. And like we mentioned in previous weeks, Jesus goes through this wackadoo trial. And all the guys who are normally with him, they're gone because they think that for some reason, it seems to me that they think, well, this wasn't really what we thought it was.
Yeah.
And so now to avoid persecution, to avoid suffering, to avoid tribulation, to avoid these things, we have to disperse
they bailed.
in a
Yeah.
sense, you know. But the story emphasizes this idea that even when everybody left, there were still a few there to see.
Yeah. So there's witnesses still.
Yeah.
And he mentions these names that, like you said, so even if the disciples weren't there, these women could have said,
Yeah.
here's what was going
Well,
on.
and everybody knew who they were too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're a Jew reading this. I mean, if you have any interest in the story and the life of Jesus, you read this, you go, I've heard her name before.
Yeah.
I've seen her before. These are popular Christian characters in the early first century that people would know.
And they could check their sources with too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of shift gears slightly. We have other gospel accounts that include John and John's conversation with Jesus on the cross, but Matthew doesn't include him here, but he does mention his mother, the mother of the sons of Zebedee. And it's interesting that if we were to think on the influence of Jesus' apostles or his disciples, at some point they got their moms involved.
Yeah.
And so we can even see that while Matthew may not record their being present, he does record that they're moms. So it shows that influential sphere that they had was able to still bring
It was
people
growing.
in.
It was
Yeah.
pulling in their family and all of that.
And all the story, you know, the whole story from all the way back to chapter 26 when this whole thing starts. Everybody who's mentioned is a witness to the things that are happening, to the witness to the things to where, like you said, they can check their sources. They can, you know, go, oh, did this really happen? There's no reason for them to lie about this. We've talked about that before. You know, there's no reason
there's
they
no
have to
benefit.
lie. There's no benefit. So,
Well, then it goes on. It says, when it was evening, so Jesus died. The women are here witnessing all of this too, just making mention of the different people that were there. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea, which according to my knowledge, we don't actually know where Arimathea was, but we know it's in Judea. And his name is Joseph. And he himself had also become a disciple of Jesus. Now, some of our other gospels call him a member of the council too, and which that's kind of significant. So you have a Jewish influential religious leader who had become a disciple, right? I mean, he would have been part of the Sanhedrin if he's part of the council, right?
Yeah, and that's Matthew doesn't describe that, but he does acknowledge him as a rich man, which
Yeah.
is someone who's held in prominent in
Yes.
society. And
Which-
then we see in the following verses that he had some clout to be able to come and ask what he asked.
Which would have made sense that he maybe was part of the Sanhedrin and all that too, because they were the wealthy kind of group and all of that. Probably a Sadducee too, if we want to get all technical. But
Yeah, but it shows. I mean, just in these few verses, it shows the universality of Jesus and his message. We see a Gentile, we see women, we see someone from the ruling class. I mean, it all comes together with this confession that truly this was the Son
Yeah.
of God. And so, under that confession, we are all united.
that's a neat point. Yeah, so you got all these different people coming together, including this rich man right now from Arimathea, and he comes to Pilate and he asks for the body of Jesus, and Pilate ordered it to be given to him. Now, obviously, he's a man of influence, to be able to even approach Pilate and ask that. Some peasant over here isn't going to even get close to Pilate to be able to do that. So this is a guy that's important. And he asks for the body of Jesus, and he takes this body. Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. So this Joseph guy's doing a good deed here. You might be thinking maybe in our modern context, like, why would he want the body of Jesus? What is he doing? He's giving him respect, right?
yeah, it's the part of that honor shame culture. Probably from what I understand, that there was a behind this place where bodies were crucified, they were thrown in a big dump hole kind of thing. From what I understand, I could be wrong. But I read something on that one time that they were just kind of like a common area for.
Yeah.
Well,
criminals aren't going to get an honorable death or an honorable burial.
Right. So the respect, the level of respect that this man Joseph has for Jesus drives him to do something that is very, very unusual, especially for a man in a religious position like him.
Yeah.
Very, very, very unusual to take somebody who was classified as a criminal and to give them an honorable burial. Is very unlike anything we see.
And it shows that the following of Jesus is a key concept throughout Matthew. And here, when his disciples are gone, this man takes a huge political gamble political risk to go and get the body of Jesus. And if he was a member of the Sanhedrin, that's kind of throwing it in the face of his buddies.
Maybe they didn't know he was a disciple too, up until this point. He's kind of, now he's putting it out there. I believe in this guy. Yeah, I was following him. I respect this guy. Maybe everybody else is like, aha, we got him. And he's like, I need to honor him. So,
right. Well, the fact that Matthew, I think, is the only one that mentions the fact that Joseph is a disciple. I know that in John, it doesn't say that he's a disciple, but it says that he went to Pilate with Nicodemus and asked for the body of Jesus. And so we know at some point in this time that there's these two big Jewish figures that are bearing the body of
and we
Jesus.
don't know the extent of his, I don't want to say discipleship. That sounds bad, but I mean,
it could be in Luke too.
He could be following along for, one of those guys in the crowd. And we're not saying that he's an inner circle part of Jesus, but he's someone that obviously saw something in Jesus. Yeah. He's starting to follow him along and listen to what he's saying, and now he wants to give him honor.
Yeah, and in John's gospel, it says in chapter 19, starting verse 38, after these things, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for the fear of the Jews, asked Pilate that he might take the body away. Pilate gave permission. He came with Nicodemus, who had earlier come in the night.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's secretly that he came to Pilate or he's a disciple in secret, but that interaction and all that, here still, obviously, he wouldn't have been popular among the Jewish people. Well, he's also, as a wealthy man, he had means to take care of this body, and he's wrapping it in a clean cloth, giving it a proper burial, and he had his own tomb, which shows that he's wealthy. Poor people don't have that,
Yeah, it says he was a rich man from Arimathea.
Yeah, no, of course. It just
and a new tomb, because they reused tombs, right? Like
from what I understand,
they waited for everything to kind of decompose away, and then put the bones in a box.
Yep.
And that's what
we talked about that in an earlier podcast. Bone box.
Bone box. Yeah. All right. So he has his own tomb here, and he has a large stone that's rolled in front of it. So they place Jesus in there. They roll the stone over the front of this tomb, and they go away. And Mary Magdalene was there. She witnessed all of this, and the other Mary sitting opposite of the grave. So now we have the body of Jesus placed in this tomb, hewn out of the rocks, and now a stone is rolled in front, and Mary and other Mary are there, probably mourning, this whole situation.
Well, it shows you that they didn't leave. They were there.
No, they were there.
Matthew's emphasizing this point. They are witnesses. They are there. They are seeing these things. They probably more likely than not, this something that Matthew did get from an extra,
maybe from them.
From them.
Yeah. And I want to mention the women factor here again too. These women were there to the bitter end, I guess you could say. They were the ones that are dedicated. And even nowadays, some of the most dedicated, committed Christians you'll find are women. Men sometimes can be losers when it comes to it. And I mean, you'll go to what? Egotistical, yeah, prideful, all that. But you got, I've been, preaching in different churches before, and small churches, oftentimes churches that are dying, the last remaining people there are not men. It's these older women that are still dedicated to wanting to keep that church functioning. And here are these women here that are still part of this cause, and they're committed to Jesus. It says, now on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate. And they said, Sir, we remember that when he was still alive, that the deceiver said, after 3 days, I am to rise again. So they're familiar with what Jesus taught, right? They paid enough attention that they knew that he predicted a resurrection. And so they go to Pilate, these religious leaders of the Pharisees, and they go, we're worried because he said that in 3 days he was going to rise again. Therefore, give orders for the grave to be made secure until the third day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, he has risen from the dead, and the last deception will be worse than the first. So what are they worried about?
They're worried about this elaborate scheme put together to show that, hey, the body's gone. Yeah. Jesus is resurrected.
Right. We need to secure it so that we don't have some kind of mishap, because we know that people, when they die, they don't raise from the dead. But this guy's saying he's going to raise from the dead. So it's almost like they've got two avenues. Well, we don't really want him. We want to make sure he doesn't raise from the dead, and we want to make sure that his disciples don't if he doesn't raise from the dead, come and steal his body and say he's risen from the dead.
Yeah.
The tomb is empty.
Which it really doesn't matter because that's the story that they go around
Exactly.
and tell about.
They tell
anyway.
everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're really concerned about this thing that he said, that I will, it's funny how it changes. When he's in the trial, it says that, did you not say that I will destroy this temple and in 3 days I will rise again? And so they're stuck on this one thing that they're really bothered by this statement that he's
You
made.
could just see that hint of truth that this could possibly happen.
And this is something they can't control.
Yeah.
They could arrest him. They could nail him to a cross. They could do all that. But outside of him already being dead, they have no control over that.
Right. And the fact that they go to Pilate and say, hey, we want to make sure you secure this so this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Means that they're fearful.
worried,
they're
yeah.
afraid.
Well, and I think it's also important to maybe step back and realize, why is Matthew hitting this 3 days thing hard? I think we're going to see before we end our time tonight, but there is a reason why this 3 days, 3 days, 3 days, he keeps saying that in 3 days he's going to raise himself. He said that he'd destroy the temple and raise it in 3 days. He said that he'd raise himself in 3 days, in 3 days. And so we're going to see the culmination of that.
And Matthew's giving time markers in here. The next day, the day of preparation, he's doing these countdowns. So verse 64, therefore, he said, make it secure. Verse 65, Pilate said to them, you have a guard. Go make it as secure as you know how. And they went and made the grave secure. Along with the guard, they set a seal on the stone. So I imagine they are making sure everything's secure around it, piling up whatever they got to pile. They put a guard there, and they put a seal, which I'm assuming kind of like a royal governmental type seal, that if you break this band, people are going to know that something happened.
Yeah.
It's like the hair across the door frame, right?
Yeah.
Or across the ignition on the car. Yeah.
But go ahead.
No, I just want to point out a contrast here between what we see with Joseph of Arimathea and what we see with these religious leaders. Again, we could circle back to this question: why are the religious leaders rejecting Jesus? And again, I think Matthew's emphasizing the point that they have a heart problem. That people with a heart problem always have a selfish ambition.
Yeah.
And the inability to acknowledge when something is not what they say it is.
Yeah. To admit they're wrong, to admit they're messed up and all that.
And I think that again, Matthew's trying to show that contrast, but in the midst of this story that he's telling about, the precautionary measures and the honorable burial and the witnesses at the tomb. And we're going to see the culmination of that here in just a second. But I think that that's something that we need to mark in our minds.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback off of that, we see their concerns here. Their concerns are that the last fraud will be worse than the first. So the last fraud being the Son of God is resurrected. The first fraud being I am the Son of God. And so if we look at things, and that's what, while it's not a fraud, that last truth is more pivotal. The Son of God is resurrected. That is a arguably more important fact than just that Jesus was the Son of God. Yeah. Jesus was the Son of God, but guess what? He defeated death for all of us and is resurrected.
And that's what proves that he's beyond any kind of other great Son of God in the past, like David or anything else you're talking about. He is the divine, incarnation of Almighty Creator, all of that. Well, so they seal it up and make it so he can't get out, and people, more importantly, can't get in. Is kind of what they're thinking
or the
about.
Body be swapped out for something else.
And we would know that if there was something like that. Chapter 28. Now after the Sabbath, so another day marker now, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, so Sunday, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. So here they are again, coming back to the grave, caring about Jesus. They want to be there. And behold, a severe earthquake had occurred. For an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled away the stone and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. And the guards, now we see multiple guards too, shook for fear of him and became like dead men. So these women come up to the tomb, and what happens?
The guys faint.
Yeah.
Or the angel comes and this
whole earthquake scene,
and then the guards that were there, the guards that the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders put in place, fainted.
And not a slow prying away of this stone, but hurled away, right? Kind of the idea. And the grave is opened up, the tomb is opened up, and an angel is there sitting. And I don't know, I like the fact that he's sitting on top of the stone.
Kind of like drinking his morning coffee. Just
hey, guess what, guys?
Hey, guys, you see him with his legs spread out.
Hey, you know the stone that everybody thought was not going to be moved? We moved it. Right? That kind of thing. We also are going to destroy this world one day. So, I mean,
let's talk about how amazing this feat is because, I think at least in the world, this is downplayed. And I don't even think the magnitude is fully understood. We're reading this story about a man the most influential man in the world. We're still he's so influential, we're still talking about him 2,000 years later. Yeah. And he's completed this feat that nobody has ever completed. He's ridiculed. He has a shady trial. I mean, all these different things. He's done amazing things throughout his ministry, but this is probably the most amazing. And I think to somebody, if you're reading this from a first century perspective, I think we're desensitized to it in the 21st century because, we have all these, nobody gets around death, but we have all these medical things that we can do and we can save lives and we can do this and people can live. But the one thing people can't get around is death. So my whole point is that I think we're desensitized a little bit to the way this would have been perceived as someone who's reading this story in the first century, hearing this story in the first century, where, this didn't happen. They didn't have extraordinary medical procedures. They didn't have all these things. I mean, this is an incredible.
Well, and sometimes we get desensitized in that we just look at the Bible as a big fanciful story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that too.
This is real.
No, this is real. Real witnesses saw this. They showed up. They saw an angel sitting on top of the stone, and they are afraid and freaking out about it. And the angel says, don't be afraid. I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. Verse 6, he has risen.
Yeah, let me just take a step back before we move on to what the angel talks to these women about. It's interesting that the guards, right? We see this whole thread of guards through here. And if we go back, what was the men's reaction to the angels? They trembled and fainted. Mm-hmm. And that's a complete contrast to what we see at the Garden of Gethsemane, right? When Jesus says that, don't you know that I could bring 12 legions of angels? If one angel or two angels on another account can have this effect on these men, it just adds credibility to what Jesus talked about in the garden, that I could have called 12 legions of them.
I got a whole bunch of people backing me up.
Yeah. Which again just reiterates that what Jesus did was so profound, and like what you talked about last week, just the fact that his love is clearly seen through all of this.
So angel tells him he's not here, he has risen. Come and see the place where he was lying. So now these eyewitnesses, these women who came to the tomb there, are able to see where Jesus was lying. But Jesus is not there now. He has risen and his body is gone. Not
Look,
just
let me show you.
Not just his spirit went away either. You point out it's a whole bodily resurrection is happening here, this kind of thing.
Oh, and you can't mention just your mental picture of the angel sitting on the rock. You can kind of see a smirk on his face too. It's like,
check it out.
Hey, come on, he's not here. He's risen. Oh, he told you, come on in, come and check it out.
Come and check it out. I mean, that's just.
And what is his message for these ladies though? It's go quickly and tell the disciples that he has risen from the dead. And behold, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. So we have a prophecy here too, or a prediction. Not only we had the fulfillment of him resurrected from the dead, but an angel saying that go to Galilee, he's going to be there. So they leave, verse 8, and they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy and ran to report it to the disciples. And behold, Jesus met them and greeted them. Now think about that interaction here. They were devastated. Jesus was killed. They saw him die. They saw the sword go into his side. They saw him taken away and laid in the tomb. They saw the stone go in front of the tomb. And now his body's gone, and now they see him there. Right. And they came up, took hold of his feet, and worshiped him. They worship
This
the
is
resurrected
emotional.
Lord. Oh, absolutely.
This is emotional. I mean, this is an emotional response. I mean, to put it in perspective, I mean, when somebody dies, that's it. As far as we're concerned, I mean, there is no coming back from that. So, to put it in perspective, how might you feel if all of a sudden somebody that you loved and hung out with and were around all the time just popped up? I mean, the feeling of you'd be like, the feeling of awe and astonishment and wonder, and there's all these emotions that come to mind when you think about what's taking place here that these people are feeling. They're so in awe, they go to the feet of Jesus and they worship him.
They fall down at him and worship him. Yeah, absolutely. I remember I told a story before in a sermon about my sister getting lost in an amusement park, and my dad in a panic trying to find her. And when he finally found her at the security thing, I remember my dad crying and hugging and all this. They thought he was dead. And now and not only that, everything that he said, that they probably had doubts in their mind a little bit. Is it true? Is he really the Son of God? Is he really going to resurrect? All of that has come true now. And they fall down and they worship him. They see the resurrected Lord. And Jesus did something right here that no other religious leader has ever done and will ever do. He defeated death.
It's almost like every other religious leader ever in the world has tried to mimic.
Yeah, in some way.
That journey, that walk in some way, but with their own charismatic, egotistical way. People want to be like Jesus. He is the most incredible individual we've ever seen walk the face. I mean, I haven't personally seen him, but I read about him and I visualize what's there. And you look at these others that have kind of tried to walk that path of influence, and it's just unmatched. There's no match to the walk of Jesus and the leadership that he showed.
Yeah.
Or the reaction that he elicits.
Yes.
So even seeing here, the angels told these women to go do three things, to go share the gospel, for crying out loud. And so the women were the first ones to share the gospel, and they were interrupted. So they went with great fear and joy to the disciples. And so they went out to share the gospel with great fear and joy, so that I'm going to take a brief tangent. Do I have that same reaction?
Right.
Do I go share the gospel with great fear and great joy? Do I go share that same message that, listen, he's risen, he's gone on ahead of us, and that we're going to see him again? Do I share that same message the way these women do?
That urgency, that zeal here to do that.
And then Jesus comes back to circle back around. He comes back and sees them. They respond in the only way you can respond to Jesus.
Is to worship him.
He reiterates the message that the angels brought.
Yeah.
Go
verse 10, go tell him. Yeah. I also want to mention, too, in verse 9, the fact that they are worshiping him. And I know this might be off on a little tangent, but I've gone to this passage before when someone has challenged me that Jesus isn't God. I've had people tell me that before. And I'd say, well, here you have Jesus accepting worship and receiving worship and getting and all that. If they were worshiping him here, well, and he's not God, they're violating Matthew 4. I see you got that open there, right, Curtis? Matthew 4, was it verse 4?
Yeah, so in the temptation of Satan, or when Jesus was tempted, by Satan, for it is written, which is a callback to Deuteronomy, but in chapter 4, verse 10, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.
So only God is worthy of worship.
Yeah. And so we see that at the beginning of Matthew's gospel, the beginning of the story of Jesus that Matthew starts sharing. He says that you only worship God. Here at the end, we see on two occasions, we're going to see one here and then one next week, where Jesus is accepting of worship. Yeah. And so that puts a nice bookend around the fact that Jesus is God because he is accepting of worship and worthy to be worshiped.
Yes, very true. So definitely significance there. So Jesus tells him, verse 10, do not be afraid. Go and take my word. That message right again, the gospel to my brethren, and leave for Galilee, and there they will see me. So tell everybody along the way and go meet me up in Galilee, right? Now when they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priest all that had happened. So now the guards are like, well, this all went down. It was crazy. We became like dead men, all that kind of thing. And they went to go report it. Verse 12, and when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, you are to say, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. So, wow, what's going on here? Another deception, right? So even though now these religious leaders, these chief priests, know that Jesus did resurrect from the grave, when the soldiers are reporting, say, look, keep it to yourself. Don't tell anybody. Here's a whole bunch of hush money right now to keep you quiet. Just tell them that, well, you fell asleep and that the disciples came and stole the body. Verse 14, and if this should come to the governor's ears, we will win him over and keep you out of trouble. You know, first off, I don't think they had that influence. They didn't. Those soldiers would have probably been killed. And
if they fail in their commission,
Yeah.
they're dead.
yeah, they're done for. So not only are they lying and deceiving, they're throwing these soldiers under the bus too. And they took the money and did just as they had instructed. And this story was widely spread among the Jews and is to this day. So that little story, deception, was the only way out of the reality of this. Was, well, tell everybody the disciples stole the body.
And it is, I mean, this was 20-ish years later, it was still circulated. And
Yeah.
now 2,000 years later, it's still
Yeah, the people that deny the
circulated.
resurrection, that's one of the alternative
Yeah.
ways of saying
Yeah.
something had happened.
I wonder where they got that from.
Yeah.
You know?
But there's so much here, right? So if we go back to Matthew 23, Jesus is right before he starts doing all his woes to the scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He talks about that do what they teach, but not what they do. And so I've hit again on this importance of the Greek word poieo, or do or make, and its connection with fruit. And if we were to go back to Matthew 6, we see the importance of doing fruit for the glory of God, and that we can evaluate our heart based off what we do, and to do fruits, be fruity for the purpose of spreading seed for the glory of God. And here we see that poieo word used 2 more times in verse 14, keep you out of trouble, to do you out of trouble. And then also verse 15, and they took the money and did as they were directed. And so we see the fruits associated with what they were doing. And it's fruit that goes against the gospel.
It's deception. It's,
It's circling the
manipulation,
wagons. Let's get on the same story here, guys. We got to make this up. Let's all get on the same page so we're telling the same story.
And obviously something happened enough here to make them have to do that too. Yeah.
I mean, we have basically 2 markers at the end of this. The first one is the confession of the centurion, right? And the second one is what Matthew displays at the end of verse 15. And this story has been spread among the Jews to this day. So it's almost like Matthew writes this story to Jews to say, I wonder if the story about Jesus' body being stolen is true. If you're a Jew and you read this story, you're familiar, probably for the most part, familiar with the life of Jesus and what he did, and people talk about it. He's a very influential figure. I have no doubt in my mind that story was still being talked about for generations and generations of Jews after Jesus already came. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind. Even if they weren't Christians, they were still talking about this, about what Jesus had done. And the what's the word I'm looking for? The assumption or the illusion that Jesus had resurrected from the dead, even if they hadn't seen it,
They'd heard about it.
it. And here you have this story. Let me tell you the truth. Let me tell you the truth about Jesus and what he did. I'm a firsthand witness. I'm a disciple. I followed him. I saw these things. I lived with him. I walked with him. I saw what he did. I'm a Jew. I can relate to you.
Yeah. So, and especially I like you bring up that this book is written primarily to a Jewish audience. So they would have known the rumor. They would have had the false story, and Matthew would say, no, I was there.
Right.
Let me tell you the true story. Eyewitness, I kind of like that. And now they were going to be hearing it. Did he actually did resurrect from the grave?
Yeah. And it's like, even to illustrate it a little bit further, I mean, when you hear a story or a rumor from somebody, you hear the parts of that story that they want you to hear.
Yeah.
You don't hear the full story, right? They say there's, what do they say? There's his side, her side, and the truth, right? What happens in the middle? This guy, what this guy saw, what this guy said, what this guy said, and then there's the truth right down the middle. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. Here's what the Jews are saying. Here's what the Gentiles are saying. But here's the truth from someone who
was there, who has witnesses and names he's dropping and everything else.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up your comment on the truth because we see what Matthew discusses here, and I'm going to take a big circle.
Okay.
But I'll circle back around.
Do quickly.
And so it is the truth. And that's what the resurrection is the most it is the event in world history, right?
Yeah.
It is the event, and that's what we see with Paul, right? And you even alluded to in your sermon last week on how we know that the Bible is true. And J. Warner Wallace is an awesome apologist who discusses the truth concept, and he looks at it from like a police detective standpoint, and he uses Paul on what motivation he has to lie. And he doesn't fit that criteria. And we see in 1 Corinthians what Paul talks about on the resurrection. And he said that if the resurrection didn't happen, we, more than anyone else, are to be the most pitied.
Yeah.
And so it shows that this conflicting stories, right? So what evidence did Paul have to create this fabricated story? He lost his position, he lost his money, he lost his power to tell this story. Whereas these guys, these guards, they gained money. They had the money, the monetary motivation to lie to avoid the truth. And so if we were to look at this whole body of
benefited them to
evidence,
lie, but not the disciples to tell the
it
truth.
benefited them to lie, but it doesn't benefit Paul to lie.
Yeah. And that could very well be what we're seeing here. That's a very good way to look at it in the sense of the contrast. You have the disciples, the firsthand witnesses, and you have the firsthand witnesses who have monetary gain over this particular event.
And it's kind of interesting.
They're giving me money, so I'm just not going to say anything about it. I'm going to tell this side I'm going to tell the Pharisaical side of the story.
Yeah, I mean, we can speculate as to how Matthew knew this story, but we know that a lot of the chief priests and elders were converted to Jesus in Acts, right? And so it's not uncommon that one of the guys who handed the money to them could have told Matthew firsthand that, hey, this is what happened. That's why that story is being around.
We did this. It was bad.
Yeah. But the whole point, and just we see in verse 11 is the last behold of this section, which you brought up a couple weeks ago. This word behold, where Matthew is like putting a big neon sign as to the issue, and what he highlights more than anything else is the resurrection of Jesus. And that's something that I don't highlight more than anything else is the resurrection of Jesus.
It all points to the resurrection. If our message out there isn't pointing toward the Jesus and his resurrection, we're preaching the wrong message.
We above more or all other men shall be most pitied.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what basis do we have for anything we do if the resurrection is not true?
Yeah.
What do we have? We don't have anything.
We have nothing.
And there's a lot of good apologists that point out that same fact. The idea that, our faith should be tethered to the resurrection.
Oh yeah, it all hinges on
that should be the thing that, and I like what you brought up. Our faith should be our focus, our proof should be proving the resurrection.
Yeah. That needs to be our number one message.
If that is not our number one message, there's something we're doing wrong.
And just like these women, we need to share that message with fear and great joy. That message is that he's risen, he's gone on before us, and we're going to see him again.
Very good. Amen. On that. I think that's a good place to stop. Now, if you're following along at home and we're thinking, well, man, you only got like 4 verses left here, 5 verses left. We're saving that for next week because we're going to finish out the book of Matthew, and we'll do a kind of a conclusion and a summary of what we've studied. And then we'll also introduce our next book of study. We're excited to announce we're going to be studying a new book. Won't tell you what that book is yet, but we've been preparing for that one, and everybody's hanging on the edge of their seat, I'm sure, right now. But keep studying along with this. We're going to have the Zoom class on Wednesday night at 7 p.m. If you need the login information, hit one of us up. It's a good way to ask questions and to discuss this section. Also, maybe you can't be part of that, but you want to send in a question, message any of us, and we'll be glad to field that. But one thing that stood out tonight is Jesus is the resurrected Lord, and we need to go with fear and great joy and tell people that fact so that they can come to Jesus and worship him. Anything we need else to say tonight, gentlemen?
Tell people the story.
Tell people the story.
Just tell people the story. I mean, we've talked about this before. That one area that we can really, really improve is just getting out there and telling people the story of Jesus. Yeah. Tell it like everybody who comes to church on a regular basis, who reads the story of Jesus on a regular basis, is familiar with the story of Jesus,
so
and you can tell it.
It's a pretty cool story,
and I'll give you an example, and this is just me, trying to get people excited in the Bible. About a year ago, I listened to a series on the Gospel of Mark, and all it was the story, right? It was the story of Jesus. That was it. And it got me thinking, right? What is more exciting than the story of Jesus, right? When somebody gives me a highlight reel or tells me, bits and pieces of things, well, I'm more encouraged to go back and look at the details. Yeah. Right? My sister-in-law brought her boyfriend up, and I was talking with him, and that's what I did. I gave him a highlight reel. And you know what he did? He went and he started reading the story on his own. Nobody told him to do that. But that's how powerful story is. Story. That's how powerful story is.
Amen.
So get out there and tell the story.
I like it. Well, on that note, we will close tonight. Appreciate everybody tuning in and being part of this study as we've gone through this magnificent gospel. Keep sharing that message of Jesus. Have a good evening.